Welcome to the Mindset by Design podcast with your host, the expert Andy Murphy, where you will learn the tips, tricks, and strategies he teaches his world-class clients to give you the skills to dominate any business.
What's going on, Mindset by Design crew, and welcome to episode 271. Hope you're amazing as always, and life is beautiful. You know, I hope life is beautiful, and wherever you are in the world right now, hey, I hope you're safe. I hope you can pay your bills. I hope you can put food on the table. And I hope more than anything that you're getting ready and preparing for the new future, your new future. I really hope that, man, because there's so many people who got stuck. There's so many people that got stuck in this time, froze in fear or froze with a brain response. Either way, it means people aren't doing anything. But I know you're listening to this for a reason, and the reason is, are you ready to kick ass? If not, you're already kicking ass. I know you are. I know you are. It's interesting, man. It's interesting still looking at the borders around the world because I'm getting ready to travel again. And working out where to go, what countries to bounce to. And it's an interesting ride. It's an interesting ride right now. But you know what it does for me? It makes me so much more determined, and I didn't know that was possible, to just give everyone the tools that they need to live the life that they deserve, you know, to create the business and income that you want. And lots of people have shut down, as I say, and I wanted to share this episode today. It's an older one. It's actually 155. So, hey, over 100 episodes ago, which is quite crazy in itself, man. But it's all about dopamine. And back then, there was certain new studies that came out, and it was showing that dopamine isn't quite like what we thought it originally was. We thought it was a pleasure chemical, right? And it can be that, but we're going to get into it. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. But it's so important that you really listen to this episode because so many people are going either way with this chemical. So many people are either escaping or they're looking for the shiny object syndrome or they're chasing something that isn't congruent or in alignment with them. And you're in panic mode, right? There's a lot of people like that right now. Which is why I've started to layer together, if you haven't noticed, quite a few episodes. So it's like your own mini course, you know? And for you new listeners to Mindset by Design, then you need to hear this. First of all, welcome. Always awesome to have a new listener. Second thing is, what we're here on about a Mindset by Design is about building new behaviors, new ways of thinking, feeling, and acting, using the unconscious mind, conscious control. We're using neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, which I'm a world-class expert at, neuroscience, behavioral psychology, and neuro-retraining, which are all my own systems. Why? What for? What makes it unique is that this is designed specifically for business. It's mental performance for business. It's not self-help. It's not personal development, although you will develop your person. And I want you to treat this podcast a little bit differently from the others. Yeah, we make them fun, of course, right? Life's supposed to be fun. But we also make sure that it's very technical. There's a lot of knowledge in here. And I've had people in the past use this just as a library. And I want you to do the same. There's 271 episodes. That's 271 hours, basically, of me talking, me being interviewed or interviewing some world-class people. So guess what? Go and play. Go and put yourself together by using different sessions and use them as sessions. And then suddenly you can help yourself. And my mission is I love entrepreneurs. I love high performers. I love people who are creating their world. And I really, really hand on heart believe that, well, Entrepreneurs or forward thinker, visionary leaders are the people that are going to change this economy. It was going to create a new world, a new future, an incredible one. And so what we have to do is we have to get together as entrepreneurs, as thought leaders, and we have to go and kick ass, and we have to become the best version of us. It's the only way. And that's why over the past X amount of episodes, I've really tried hard to layer them together to give you very specific tools in this time to make sure that you jump to being the top 1% performer and you're not left with everybody else. That's why I gave you a whole masterclass in episode 270 of what? EQ. Yeah, emotional intelligence and how to apply it in everyday business. If you didn't listen to it, you need to go listen to it because this is about influence and high-level communication. So 269, I wanted to put some NLP basics down for you. So I wanted to show you about the filter system, but how that connects, and it literally changes your perception and reality just instantly. And before that, 268, well, guess what? That was me being interviewed by a friend of mine, Jeff Falladon. And guess what? Well, that was speaking about the psychological truth that's going on right now and how the culture has actually changed, even if the economy hasn't, right? So check that out. I also wanted to show you 267. Why? Well, that's Tech and Trends by an amazing friend of mine, a mentor, Dean Gray. He's a futurist, and that's showing you the next bleeding edge trends. What else? I went to 265. I brought in Stephanie, and we spoke about sleep, happiness, and brain power. Why? Because those are things that you have to have. And that's my whole mission with life, is just to help you. So you got to help yourself, right? Beautiful, beautiful. So today's episode's all about dopamine. We're going to get into it in a second. And just before we do, make sure that you're stepping up. It's not the time to be hanging back right now. It's the time to be leaning in. So guess what? Let's have a chat. First thing is, I have one, maybe two this month. Well, then for the next month, appointments available for clients. That's it. So, man, if you want your business worked out, if you want your income streams opened, if you want to, whatever procrastination's going on, just to drive it forwards, if you want to up-level that money belief, if you want to see what moves to make next, if you want to be able to switch on every single day in every single meeting, if you're in real estate or sales right now and you want to double your closing percentage, talk to us, talk to me, right? I've done this for 18 years all over the world with the top people in the world, and I want to give you the same tools, systems, and techniques that I've developed over that time. And so hit those show notes. That's the first one, right? You all should be jumping on that. The second one is everybody, everybody wakes up in the morning and you all need to switch your nervous system on, brain on, and light up that world-class performer. And that's the audio for you. It's $7. Think you can handle it, but it will change your life. And if you thought it sucked, message me. I'll give you a cash back, man. But the point is, these are tools to make sure that you are kicking ass and living your fullest potential. And what else we got in there? Well, make sure you're hanging out in the incubator group with me. And I will, on Facebook, and I will be launching the 1% performer, the top 1% performer formula. Yeah, that's 12 weeks of absolute gold, and you can be part of that very, very soon. And my goal is to make it affordable for everybody. So look out for that soon. So let's jump into this right now. Let's learn all about dopamine and how to use it as a top 1% performer to be able to accelerate and understand where it's sabotaging you in your business and life. You're going to love it, and I will see you at the end of the show. So here we are, Mindset by Designers. Let's just take a big, deep breath and settle in, Remember, this is an article, and I'll give you the details about the article, right? It's from a Scientific American Mind, and doesn't have a date, but it's maybe a month old, 2 months old. Maybe it's not, right? But it's mine 19. It was with my stack of other magazines, and I picked it up, and it's by an amazing name that is really hard to pronounce, and I'm going to try. Maya Sazalavitz. I'm going to spell it, so maybe you can let me know in Facebook if it's the right name. So it's Maia, second name SZ, or Z for you Americans, Alavitz. Okay. Epic name for an epic article. It's called The Currency of Desire, and as I said before, look, I ain't the best reader, but I'm going to read it. So whatever, right? I'm going to do my best. So the currency of desire. So rethinking the pleasure molecule could help scientists better understand addiction, Parkinson's disease, and motivation. So the thing of what I found with Parkinson's disease is that you really do lose that motivation, that drive inside to do anything. The person who I'm talking about who's close to me, they've been an athlete all their life. And then suddenly they don't have that even drive, desire to move the body the same way. Hey, that's not for everyone. I also know other people with Parkinson's who have been professional athletes, and they've fallen over all the time with Parkinson's, but they get up, they smile, and then they go to the gym every day. So it's just different. But that depends on the dopamine levels. So let's jump into this article. So when Stephanie, a 34-year-old middle manager from the Midwest, began to overeat, it was not typical of her behavior. She had never before had trouble with her weight, but in 2009 she started to feel an overwhelming hunger, particularly for sugar, and soon was rapidly piling on the pounds. Then, just as abruptly, Stephanie developed an obsession with gambling. She would play games of chance online. I've never bought a lottery ticket in my life, she recalls. Yet she began to do compulsively. I would go from gas station to gas station. I had places that in my mind I thought were better places to win. Stephanie did not realize until years later, but her behaviors could be all explained as side effects from a medication called Mirapex. Her doctor had prescribed it to treat Parkinson's disease, which she was diagnosed at an unusually young age of 29. Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative disease condition that causes tremor and movement difficulties. Although much about it remains mysterious, scientists know that the disease gradually destroys brain cells that produce the neurotransmitter dopamine. Mirapex acts, in a sense, as an artificial version of this molecule, activating the same receptors in the brain, which can help explain Stephanie's problem. Although few of us spend time contemplating the molecule messengers at work in our brain, we owe a tremendous amount to them. To do and to dopamine in particular. It always plays a part in movement, motivation, mood, and memory. And as Stephanie's tale hints, it also has a dark side. The neurotransmitter is implicated in addiction, schizophrenia, hallucinations, and paranoia. Yet dopamine is the best known for its role in pleasure. In the popular press, dopamine is delight and the brain's code word for bliss. The stuff that makes psychoactive drugs dope. Articles and documentaries describe dopamine as what makes life worth living, the chemical that permits more enjoyable moment to be savored. Every enjoyable moment to be savored. I told you I sucked at reading, look. But it's a good article, right? So the hit everyone is chasing, whether through social media, psychoactive substances, sports, food, sex, or status. But it may be time to rethink these ideas. Nora Volkov director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse and longtime researcher of the neurotransmitter, would like to set the record straight. Dopamine is not the pleasure molecule in the simple, direct way it's typically portrayed in the media. She says its function is more nuanced. Today, the precise nature of dopamine is a matter of much controversy. Some researchers argue that dopamine, when acting within what has become known as the brain's reward system, signals desire. Others claim that it helps the brain predict rewards and direct behavior accordingly. A third group splits the difference, saying both explanations can be valid. Ironically, if there's anything that scientists now agree on about this neurotransmitter, is that dopamine does not neurologically determine joy. Instead, this little molecule may unlock the intricate mystery of what drives us. That's what fascinated me right there, right? Because something I talk about, and I'll explain at the very end, my summary, very, very quick, by the way, of what this whole article is. But I love it, right? So talking about motivation, this is what fascinates me about dopamine. Because the thing is, in missing motivation, in 1978, REWIRE, then at Concordia University in Quebec, published a seminal paper on dopamine. He depleted levels of neurotransmitters in rats with antipsychotic medications and found that the rats would stop working to receive yummy foods or desirable drugs such as amphetamine. The animals could still make the movements needed to obtain what they should have craved, which suggested that the behavior changed because the experience was no longer rewarding. Brilliant, right? And by the way, it sucks that they do these experiments on animals. It is horrible. And it's 1978. Okay, that's a long time ago, right? So hopefully things have changed. So dopamine, at least when acting with a circuit located near the middle of the brain, seemed to be necessary for anything to feel good. Over the next decade, data in supported of wise ideas only grew. So when neuroscientist Kent C. Berridge began researching dopamine at the University of Michigan, around that time he believed that, like most of his colleagues, that it was a pleasure signal. Berridge's own work was focused on facial expressions of pleasure, which are surprisingly congruent among mammals. Even rats will avidly lick their lips when they receive sweet food and open their mouth in disgust when encountering a bitter taste, as will human babies. Interesting. Typically, mammalism expressions of satisfaction intensify when, for example, a hungry rat receives an especially tasty treat or a thirsty rat finally drinks water. Berridge thought that studying and measuring these responses could further confirm the idea that dopamine means pleasure to the brain. His colleagues in the University of Michigan, neuroscientist Terry Robinson, had been using neurotoxin to destroy dopamine, and so dopamine neurons that create rats that model severe symptoms of Parkinson's. I'm apologizing for my reading, but hey, we're getting there. So Berridge decided to give sweet foods to those rodents and see if they appeared pleased. He expected that their lack of dopamine would deny them this response because they were so dopamine depleted. Robinson's rats rarely moved if left alone. The thing was, they did not seek food and did not want to be fed artificially. They wouldn't want to drink or do anything, Berridge says. Unexpectedly, however, their facial reactions were completely normal. They continued to lick their lips in response to the sweet things and grimace at a bitter meal. They tried again and again, but Berridge and his colleagues got the same result, and they conducted an experiment that basically created the opposite conditions. By ramping up dopamine levels in rats using electrolytes implanted in appropriate regions, the rats did not lick their chops more eagerly when eating, as the dopamine is pleasure theory predicted. Right? So think about this. Indeed, sometimes the animals actually seemed less pleased. The researchers were puzzled. Instead of producing pleasure, dopamine seemed to drive desire. Desire itself can be enjoyable in small doses, but in the long run, if it is not satisfied, it creates just the opposite effect. So think about this as being an entrepreneur. Because dopamine is that feeling that's going to drive us forwards, right? So we get excited about novelty and new ideas and new possibilities and clicking that next Facebook ad or whatever it is, right? The thing is, that creates that pleasure response, or it creates a novelty response, right? Which means you get a dopamine spike. The thing is, when you're doing a project for a long period of time, if you're not moving forwards, if you're not creating novelty, if you're not getting results, that dopamine isn't then going to be released, which means you're going to start to lose motivation, drive, etc. towards that project, right? So what happens is we get that shiny object syndrome, right? You've heard me speak about this, I'm sure, a million times, but we get that shiny object syndrome. So we're always looking for the grass is greener. But the thing is, when you start to understand it's really dopamine levels, when you start to really understand it's actually biochemical, then guess what? We can trick it in different ways. So back to it. Does that make sense? So eventually, Berridge and Robinson realized that the pleasure involved in seeking a reward and that of actually obtaining it must be distinct. They labeled the drive that dopamine seemed to induce as wanting, and they called the joy of being satiated, which means satisfied. Which did not seem to be connected with dopamine liking. This association fits with the studies of Parkinson patients that are still, after all, able to enjoy life's ups, but often have problems with motivation. Perhaps the most vivid example of this occurred in the early 20th century with an epidemic left thousands of people with an especially severe Parkinson condition. The brain was so depleted of dopamine that they were unable to initiate movement and were essentially frozen in place, like living statues. And it actually says about the film The Awakening with Robin Williams, and he's the neurologist. Oliver Saxon was based on the doctor's 1973 memoir of treating such a patient. Imagine that, man. Can you even get your head around what that must be like? Damn, to be locked inside and be consciously aware but not be able to communicate. Breaks my heart, you know? So, but sufficiently strong external stimulus could spark action for people with this condition. Now, this is what I was talking about before, because remember that person who's close to the family with Parkinson's, they've lost that motivation, although they've been the athlete all their life. And it's crazy because the dopamine will get spiked with novelty, and that's my conclusion with all of this, and I'll speak about more of that at the end. But it's when you start to understand that this next bit that I'm about to say is amazing. It's amazing. But a sufficiently strong external stimulus could spark action for people with this condition. In one case cited by Sachs, a man who typically sat motionless in his wheelchair on the beach saw someone drowning. He jumped up, rescued the swimmer, and then returned to his prior rigidly fixed position. One of Sachs' own patients would sit silent and still unless thrown several oranges, which he would then catch and juggle. Think about that. That's madness, right? So appreciate what that means in your own life, right? You've probably got regulated normal dopamine levels. Absolutely. I'm sure you do, right? But the thing is, once you start to know this, then you can start to trick and spike your own dopamine levels to motivate yourself, right? So by using routines and pumping you up or coming on the masterclass, right? Or whatever it is. The thing is, when you spike that dopamine, you feel motivated and want to do more. So, do you get it? Do you get it? So we can start tricking our brains this way when we become consciously aware that this is how the brain actually responds and works. So remember that drug before? Well, with Stephanie, well, the thing is, that's what the drug does. It replicates, and the neurotransmitters of that Marapex don't understand the difference. But the drugs can also have a very destructive and distressing side effects. Stephanie went from essentially not having enough motivation to having too much, right? Remember what dopamine does. Or at least the motivation that the drug incited was misdirected. In addition to overeating, her problems on dopamine agonized, including gambling, an obsession with an iPhone, compulsive online shopping, and intrusive sexual desires. Subjectively, the experiences she described were nearly identical to those reported by people who were more typically caused addictions. In the case of the lottery ticket buying, it was like being programmed into an infinite loop, which is what happens in the brain with habits, the past, the future, your anxiety, all of those things. That's what happens. It creates a loop, and it creates an addiction, an addictive response to it. But that doesn't say that in here. Whether she won or lost, there was always a need to do it again. As Arnie Rexel, a former compulsive gambler and the author of the 2014 book on the subject called All Bets Are Off, puts it, the difference between normal people and compulsive gamblers is we chase the wins and we chase the losers, right? And there's never enough to win and there's never enough to lose. So understand, that's where it's creating novelty and the dopamine spike in the brain, right? So that is why the grass always gets greener. But it doesn't always get greener, because once the novelty wears off, you'll get in that dopamine depletion, which means your brain goes into an old pattern or an unresourceful pattern. Those are the patterns, by the way, that I break, and we rebuild different, better ones, right? So difference between normal people is compulsive gamblers chase wins, right? Many people with addictions experience an escalation in desire that similarly is not accompanied by a similar increase in enjoyment. The wanton desire was so much that I never rationally thought about it. Did I end up liking it at the end because it didn't matter? Stephanie says the experience beautifully describes what Berridge and Robinson call the incentive sensation theory of a dopamine action, which they introduced in 1993 and which has been bolstered by more recent studies. In 2005, for example, a research team at the Medical College of Wisconsin and then the National Institute of Drug Abuse tracked the brain activity of 8 people with an addiction to cocaine, and they pushed a button to self-administer the substance. In line with Berridge's wanting theory, actively along with dopamine pathways peak just before the button pushing. Think about that, right? So think about that in the whole context of life. It's the journey, right? Not the destination. So this is exactly what it's saying. So in line with Berridge's wanting theory, actively along dopamine pathways peak just before you push the button, right? So what dopamine is really doing, Berridge is saying, is taking things you encounter, little cues, things you smell and hear, and if they have motivational significance, it can magnify that significance, raising the incentive to pursue it. Makes sense, right? Makes sense. It can make them work 2 to 3 times harder to get what they crave, but it will not amplify the pleasure of the experience of rewards once they have obtained. So that's why you get like billionaires not always chasing or growing something. And people go, why? It's about the money. Why didn't they just chill out? Because it's not about the money. It's about the dopamine addiction. It's about the drive, and it's about novelty. And when you start understanding that about your business and about life, things change, right? Things change. You can see things differently. It's not that you're jumping everywhere. It's that you're needing that dopamine novelty. But the thing is, you can get that inside your own brain from yourself. We want you in control of it. But you can also get that from your own business. That's why grow your business, focus on your business, focus on your clients, focus on getting better. All of these things. What people don't understand about being an entrepreneur is that it's not the time you spend doing things, because it's going to be a lot of time. It's the novelty of expanding into it, learning more, growing, that becomes like, yeah, we crave that. That's fun because it creates and releases this neurochemical cocktail. So not just dopamine, by the way. So what have we got here? Prediction engines. More recently, other researchers focused on different function of dopamine in the brain's motivational system. They say that the brain uses dopamine in these regions not so much as a way of spur behavior through wanting, but as a signal that predicts which actions or objects will reliably provide a reward. It encodes the difference between what you're getting and what you've expected. Are you still with me, everybody? I hope so. It's quite a big article, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to summarize the next X amount of pages. I think that's way better, right? But hopefully you've enjoyed that I was reading it and going through stuff, and hopefully that you enjoyed, the topic. I hope so. So this last bit's pretty cool. I'm going to just read this last bit and then I'll summarize what my understanding of it is and why it's applicable to you, because you're probably going, what the heck, Andy? I did my best to break it up. So look, our feelings in a sense are decision-making algorithms that evolve to guide behavior towards what is historically most likely to promote survival and reproduction. Pleasure can cue us to repeat activities such as eating and sex. Fear drives us away from potential harm. But if the brain regions that determine what you value go askew, it can be extremely difficult to change your behavior, because these areas will make you want to continue and will also make the addictive behavior feel right. Okay, that last bit sums it up, and that's obviously straight from the magazine. But understand, what this backs up is everything that I've taught for 15 years. That's the cool thing about this. And I didn't realize that until I'd read it and completed the whole article and went, that's just backed up everything that I've been saying for God knows how many years about performance. Because what I teach is state control, or peak state, or alter ego control. Okay, what controls that is the emotion inside and what that is connected to, and what part of the brain it's connected to, or what part of the body it's connected to. When we can change that an emotional state, that drives that neural net, or it drives that version of us to a different view of the world, because inside that other version of us is this filter system that has our perspectives, our values, our beliefs, our attitudes in, and it has an emotion in it. It also has a chemical response, whether that's dopamine levels or neuroepinephrine or whatever it is that gets released. Well, guess what? If you're in a negative place, that means the neurons are in a negative circuit, which means then the filters and your beliefs are in a bad place, and so is your focus, which means then the chemicals getting produced are going to replicate that. Right, but if you're in a good place and you change your state by changing the emotion, when we can come over here, the circuit is different, the perspective is different, which means we're going to have a completely different emotional and logical and different choices, decisions, beliefs, and attitudes. So when we can obviously change those things, and you can see the old you and the new you and how they would work differently, well, if we can change that state, then what we're doing is we're actually changing our dopamine levels, or dopamine release levels. So by creating that novelty, we get dopamine released. This goes into a circuit, because what happens is that circuit just wants to complete. That as that circuit completes, whether the behavior is positive or negative in your life, that circuit is going to complete until it basically gets integrated into your nervous system and becomes a habit. So when you can start to understand that, as I do, maybe it's as clear as mud to you, but that and all of my systems are now I help people. This just backs this shit up. So that's pretty cool. So crew, there we go. End of episode 271. Really interested listening back to that. That was 100+ episodes ago. So that's wild, right? That's wild. And but hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully you got something from that. Hopefully it made sense. I'd love your feedback, because I'm happy to do an updated version of it for sure. But everything else, hopefully you now are ready to step up, kick ass. Why? Because it's the only choice at the end of the day. And if you are and you want everything organized, optimized, and you want to be on fire, then guess what? Just message me, right? Apply to speak to me. Let's have a chat and see what's the right fit for you. That's it, right? If it's a right fit, cool. If it's not, then hey, it's not. But at least we've been able to connect. So make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're heading over to the World Class Performer audio and getting that for yourself, because it's epic. And make sure you join in the Facebook Incubator group and just connect with me. This is a time to share this podcast. It's a time to just really level up now. It's we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but what we do know is that you can be the top 1% performer version of you anytime, any day that you choose. So have an amazing week, an amazing day, and oh yeah, one more thing. Why don't you smile for me?
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of the Mindset by Design podcast with your host and NLP expert, Andy Murphy. We'll catch you next time.